The room was already tight with heat and breath when the student stood up. Chairs scraped. A few people laughed nervously, then stopped. His voice cut through the quiet, sharp, shaking, full of something he had carried for too long. Every eye turned toward Bruce Lee. He did not move. He did not interrupt. He stood where he was, hands relaxed, listening as if the words mattered. The student stepped closer, anger spilling out in front of everyone, daring a response, daring a reaction. Silence spread, heavy and uncomfortable. This was not a private disagreement anymore. It was a public test of pride, of control, of dignity. The kind that can only end one of two ways. Bruce Lee lifted his eyes. He spoke one sentence quiet, measured, almost gentle. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just in the room. In the man standing across from him. The room did not explode into noise.
I challenge you.
The way moments like this
Then
often
come.
do. Instead, it tightened. A dozen small sounds breathing, shifting feet, fabric brushing against chairs rose, and then vanished, as if the air itself had decided to wait. The student stood near the front, shoulders rigid, jaw set so hard it seemed to ache. His hands were open, then clenched, then open again, as though he were arguing with himself about what came next. Bruce Lee faced him from only a few steps away. He had not stepped back. He had not stepped forward. His posture was
Master, I
loose
cannot
but
focus.
grounded.
My mind is restless.
Weight evenly
What if
balanced.
I'm not ready?
Eyes steady. He looked neither surprised nor challenged. He looked present. That, more than anything, unsettled the room. Someone near the wall tried to clear their throat and stopped halfway through. Another person shifted in their seat and froze, realizing the sound felt too loud. This was not how people expected moments of confrontation to unfold. There was no sharp retort, no raised hand, no signal that authority was about to assert itself. Only quiet. The student spoke again, louder now, words, pressed forward by something deeper than confidence. His voice cracked, then steadied. He was not yelling to dominate. He was yelling to be heard. Each sentence carried the weight of effort, as if saying it out
I can't
loud
keep doing
cost
this. It's
him
not
something.
enough anymore.
He
What is it
gestured
you need?
once toward
To be
Bruce
seen,
Lee,
not just
not
corrected.
aggressively,
You
but
think
insistently.
you can beat me?
Like someone
Come on,
pointing
show
at
me!
a door they had
What's the
knocked
matter,
on too many
afraid?
times. Bruce Lee
You must
did
feel
not
the
interrupt.
opponent's intent before they
He
strike.
did not correct the
Show
student's
me
tone
you are
or
ready.
posture. His gaze stayed level, attentive, almost curious. There was no hint of impatience. If anything, his stillness suggested that he had already decided to stay with the moment for as long as it required. The room began to feel smaller. People were aware of their own reactions, now the quickened pulse, the urge to look away, the uncomfortable pull between sympathy and fear. Public confrontations ask witnesses to choose sides, even when no one asks them to. No one wanted to choose yet. The student took another step forward and stopped himself, as if crossing an invisible line. His breathing was heavy now. The words slowed, less sharp, more exposed. What had started as challenge began to sound like something closer to demand, or even plea. He was standing in front of someone he respected enough to confront, which made the risk greater. Respect always does. Bruce Lee lowered his chin slightly, a small gesture that might have been mistaken for concession or acknowledgement. His hands rested at his sides, fingers relaxed. There was no performance in him, no signal that he was preparing an answer for the crowd. He seemed to be listening only to the man in front of him, as if the rest of the room had faded. Time stretched. Seconds felt longer, because everyone was waiting for the same thing. The moment when calm would break, or authority would assert itself, or anger would be returned in equal measure. That moment did not come. Instead, there was only the sound of the student's final words hanging in the air, unfinished in feeling, even after they ended. And then silence again, deeper now, heavier. The kind of silence that demands a choice, Not just from the two men facing each other, but from everyone watching. Bruce Lee inhaled slowly. He did not rush. He did not harden. He simply prepared to speak. The space itself seemed to lean inward, as if the walls had grown curious. It was not a large room, wooden floor, plain walls, the faint smell of sweat and dust, but in that moment it felt charged, alert. Light from the windows fell unevenly across the floor, catching faces in partial shadow. No one moved to adjust their position. No one wanted to be the person who broke whatever fragile balance had formed. Bruce Lee shifted his weight slightly, not away from the student, but into the ground beneath him. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, yet it carried intention. He was anchoring himself, not to resist, but to remain open. His eyes did not wander to the audience. He did not seek support or confirmation from anyone else in the room. The confrontation, though public, was being held privately between two people. The student stood closer now than before. The distance between them was narrow enough to feel personal, but not threatening. He could feel the attention pressing against his back, every expectation, every judgment, every unspoken thought from those watching. This was not how he had imagined speaking up. In his mind, the words had sounded stronger, more controlled. Here, under the weight of so many eyes, they felt raw. A few people in the room recognized the danger of moments like this. Not physical danger, but something quieter and harder to repair. Pride, shame, the kind of damage that lingers long after voices fade. They watched Bruce Lee closely, searching his face for signs of irritation or dismissal. They found none. Instead, there was a steadiness that felt deliberate. Bruce Lee's expression did not soften into sympathy too quickly, nor did it sharpen into authority. He allowed the tension to exist without rushing to fix it. That patience made the silence heavier, but also safer. It told the room that no one was about to be humiliated for speaking. The student swallowed. His shoulders dropped just a fraction, as though the fight inside him had lost some urgency. He glanced once to the side, toward the people seated along the wall, then back to Bruce Lee. The anger was still there, but it was no longer alone. Uncertainty had joined it. Someone outside the room passed by, their footsteps briefly audible through the wall. The ordinary sound felt almost intrusive, a reminder that the world had not stopped just because this moment mattered deeply to those inside it. That contrast sharpened everything. This was not a staged event. It was not meant to be remembered. And yet, everyone sensed it would be. Bruce Lee's breathing remained slow and even. He was not calculating a response meant to impress. He was waiting for something else, for the moment to fully reveal itself. His restraint was not passive. It was active attention, the kind that makes space rather than filling it. The student finished speaking, though the final words felt incomplete. He stood there,
the greatest
exposed,
fighter is not he
unsure
who conquers
whether
others,
he had said too
but
much
he
or
who
not
conquers his
enough.
own anger.
The challenge had been delivered.
Breathe deep.
The room had
Let the
absorbed
feel
it.
the harmony.
Now there
Let
was
it guide
nowhere
you.
for the moment to go except forward. Bruce Lee lifted his gaze fully, meeting the students. Eyes without force. The stillness deepened, no longer awkward, but expectant. Everyone understood now that whatever happened next would define the meaning of what had already been said. The anger
lesson
had
is
not
within.
begun in the room.
I feel it now.
It had been gathering
Good, let
long
it
before
flow.
the student stood up, shaping itself quietly through days of effort and nights of doubt. He had come to train with hope folded neatly inside him, believing discipline would bring clarity, that commitment would be met with recognition. At first, it was enough to be present, to listen, to follow. But over time, something inside him had tightened. He had watched others progress differently than he did. Not faster, not better, just differently. He told himself not to compare, yet comparison crept in anyway, subtle and persistent. Each correction he received felt heavier than the last. Each silence where he expected guidance echoed longer than it should have. He did not resent Bruce Lee. That was the part he struggled to admit. He respected him deeply. And respect, when unmet by understanding, can turn inward before it turns outward. There were moments when he almost spoke up before. Small openings that closed again when doubt arrived. He did not want to appear impatient. He did not want to seem ungrateful, so he waited. He worked harder. He absorbed frustration and called it discipline. But frustration does not disappear simply because it is hidden. It reshapes itself. By the time he spoke publicly, the words carried more than the present moment could contain. They held every time he felt unseen, every time effort did not translate into reassurance. He had convinced himself that speaking up was not about anger, but about fairness. Yet his body betrayed him, the tight jaw, the unsteady breath, a volume that rose without permission. He had not intended to challenge Bruce Lee as a person. He had intended to challenge the space between expectation and reality. But once the words left him, intention mattered less than impact. Standing there now, he felt the weight of having crossed a line he could not redraw. The room's silence amplified his awareness. Without interruption or dismissal, he was left alone with his own emotions. That was not what he expected. He had prepared himself for resistance, for correction, even for embarrassment. What he had not prepared for was being allowed to speak. Without consequence, his anger began to lose its sharpness. It did not vanish, but it softened at the edges, revealing something beneath it: fear. Fear of having misunderstood. Fear of having asked for something he was not entitled to. Fear that the respect he held might not be returned in a way he could recognize. Bruce Lee's quiet presence intensified this shift. The student could not project his frustration onto a raised voice or a hardened stance. There was nothing to push against. That absence forced him inward. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that his challenge was not just about instruction or progress. It was about belonging, about wanting to know whether his effort had meaning beyond repetition. He stood there, exposed not just to the room, but to himself. The anger that had carried him forward now felt insufficient, almost clumsy. He wondered if he had mistaken urgency for truth. He wondered if speaking had clarified anything at all. And still, Bruce Lee did not speak. The pause stretched, but it did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, as if the moment were being allowed to breathe before deciding what it would become. The student's posture shifted again, not in retreat, but in uncertainty. He was no longer challenging. He was waiting. The student drew in a breath that seemed to gather whatever resolve he had left. Waiting had become harder than speaking. The quiet pressed on him, inviting doubt, yet also demanding honesty. He lifted his head and let the words come again, slower this time, less charged, but more direct. They no longer rushed forward. They landed. He spoke of effort without naming it as sacrifice, of time given without expectation of reward, of confusion that grew when guidance felt distant. His voice did not rise now. It steadied, shaped by something closer to clarity than anger. The room listened differently. What had first sounded like confrontation now felt like exposure. A few faces softened. Others remained tense, unsure how to hold empathy in a moment that still carried risk. Public vulnerability unsettles people. It removes the comfort of clear roles. The student was no longer simply challenging a teacher. He was revealing himself. Bruce Lee remained where he was. He did not nod. He did not frown. He allowed the words to exist without signaling approval or disagreement. His stillness was not neutral. It was intentional. It communicated that the student's words were being received fully, without interruption or judgment. As the student continued, He glanced down once, then back up, as if checking whether it was still safe to go on. Each sentence seemed to strip away a layer of performance. What remained was earnest, imperfect human. He was no longer speaking to provoke a response. He was speaking because stopping now felt impossible. The room's attention shifted subtly. People were no longer waiting for Bruce Lee to respond. They were listening to the student. That shift mattered. It altered the shape of the moment. The confrontation began to resemble a conversation, even though only one voice was speaking. When the student finally stopped, the silence returned, but it felt different. Less brittle, more open. He exhaled slowly, as if realizing only then how tightly. He had been holding himself together. His shoulders dropped. His hands, which had been clenched, hung loosely at his sides. Bruce Lee met his eyes again. The look was steady, unguarded. There was no trace of impatience in it, no hint of disappointment, only attention. That alone unsettled the student more than any sharp reply could have. He had expected to be corrected, perhaps even put in his place. Instead, he was being seen. The air in the room felt heavier, but also calmer. The tension had not disappeared. It had transformed. What once threatened to fracture now seemed to be waiting for direction. Everyone sensed that the moment had reached its edge. The next response, whether spoken or withheld, would define its meaning. Bruce Lee took a small step forward. Not into the student's space, but closer than before. The movement was deliberate, measured. It signaled engagement without aggression. The student did not step back. For the first time since the confrontation began, Bruce Lee opened his mouth to speak. Then he paused, not from hesitation, but from care. He was choosing the shape of what would follow. The pause settled fully now, no longer suspended, but grounded. Bruce Lee closed his mouth again, as if deciding that words, even carefully chosen ones, could wait a few seconds longer. That decision altered the room. It told everyone that this moment was not fragile. It could hold silence without collapsing. He let his hands come together loosely in front of him. The gesture was unremarkable, almost casual, yet it slowed the space between breaths. His eyes remained on the student, not searching, not testing, simply present. The student felt it immediately, the absence of pressure, the strange relief of not being rushed toward an answer or a consequence. Inside the student, urgency began to drain away. The need to defend what he had said softened. He realized he was no longer bracing himself. The fight he had prepared for was not arriving. That realization left him unsteady. Without conflict to push against, he had to stand on his own words. Around them, the room adjusted. People shifted slightly now, not from discomfort, but from release. A few breaths were let out openly. Someone leaned back against the wall. The tension had not ended, but it had changed character. It was no longer sharp. It was heavy, contemplative. Bruce Lee glanced briefly at the floor, then back at the student. The movement was subtle, but it suggested reflection, not retreat. He was not forming a rebuttal. He was considering the weight of what had been offered to him publicly. That consideration carried respect. It placed responsibility on him without resentment. The student noticed his own breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the room. His heartbeat, which had been loud in his ears moments earlier, receded. He felt exposed still, but no longer threatened. The fear of being dismissed faded, replaced by a quieter uncertainty. What if he was taken seriously? Time stretched again, but this time it did not feel oppressive. It felt intentional, like the space before a door opens. No one interrupted. No one dared to fill the silence with nervous words. They sensed, perhaps instinctively, that this pause was doing work that speech could not. Bruce Lee lifted his head slightly. aligning his posture, as if settling into a decision rather than preparing for action. His calm was not performative. It did not ask for admiration. It simply existed, steady and unforced. In that calm, the student felt something unfamiliar, permission to be imperfect without being reduced by it. The student's gaze wavered for a moment, then steadied again. He did not look away this time. Whatever came next, he would receive it. Not as a challenge answered, but as a moment shared. Bruce Lee drew in a slow breath. The room followed without realizing it. The pause had done its work. The moment was ready to move forward, not explosively, but deliberately. Bruce Lee spoke quietly, his voice low enough that people leaned forward without realizing it. There was no edge to it, no attempt to claim the room. The words arrived measured, almost gentle, yet they carried weight because they were unguarded. He addressed the student directly, not as someone correcting a mistake, but as someone responding to an offering. He did not restate what had been said. He did not defend himself. He acknowledged the effort that had been described, not with praise, but with recognition. The difference mattered. Recognition does not elevate. It meets. Then came the sentence. Simple, unadorned. It did not explain or justify. It reaffirmed that he spoke of effort not as something owed in outcome, but as something that already had meaning. He spoke of instruction not as something withheld, but as something that sometimes arrives later than expected. And finally, he said softly, without emphasis, that if the student felt unseen, then that feeling deserved attention, not resistance. The words did not land like a verdict. They settled like a hand placed carefully on a table. Nothing in them dismissed the student's experience. Nothing in them surrendered authority. They did something more difficult. They held both without forcing either to bend. The student felt the effect immediately. The tension he had carried loosened, not all at once, but enough to change how he stood. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. The sentence did not answer every question he had, but it answered the one beneath them. Around them, the room shifted again. People who had been braced for resolution felt something quieter instead. There was no triumph in the air, no humiliation, just a shared recognition that something had been named truthfully without being made heavy. Bruce Lee did not continue speaking. He did not elaborate. He allowed the sentence to stand alone, trusting it to do what it needed to do. That restraint amplified its impact. There was no sense that more words would improve it. The student searched Bruce Lee's face, looking for signs of distance or finality. He found neither. What he saw instead was openness without invitation, firmness without dismissal. It unsettled him in the best possible way. The anger that had fueled him had nowhere to go now. It dissolved into something closer to understanding. He nodded once, small and involuntary. Not in agreement, exactly, but in acknowledgement. His eyes dropped briefly, then returned. The moment no longer felt like a test he had to pass. It felt like a weight he no longer had to carry alone. Bruce Lee stepped back to his original place, returning the space without ceremony. The movement signaled closure without separation. The confrontation had ended, but the connection remained. Room exhaled. The room felt different now, though nothing had changed outwardly. Chairs had not moved. The sunlight still fell in uneven patches across the floor. Yet something in the air had shifted. The weight that had pressed down on everyone had lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of release. People's breathing slowed. Eyes no longer darted nervously. They lingered on the student, then on Bruce Lee, then back again, as if trying to understand. What had just happened? The student's posture softened completely. He no longer carried the rigid line of someone bracing for attack. Instead, his body seemed to settle into itself. He exhaled, long and slow, and the tension that had coiled in his chest finally loosened. His hands, once clenched, rested lightly at his sides. For the first time in weeks, he felt seen not for what he had achieved, not for what he had demanded, but for who he was in that exact moment. Bruce Lee did not move to acknowledge this change. He remained calm, restrained, present. His eyes met the student's once, then soft, not with sentimentality, but with understanding. The student felt the recognition in a way that words could not convey. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible, yet it grounded him. It told him that the confrontation had not left him diminished, only clarified. Other faces in the room mirrored this shift, though more cautiously. A few students, witnesses to the exchange, began to straighten in their chairs, releasing breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. Their attention lingered not on Bruce Lee's response alone, but on the transformation it had produced in the student. The power of the moment lay not in domination or correction, but in the quiet reshaping of emotion. The student's gaze dropped to the floor for a brief moment, then rose again, steadier this time. The anger and frustration that had once threatened to erupt now seemed like a memory, a storm that had passed. In its place was something quieter, relief, understanding, the subtle warmth of being acknowledged. He realized that he had learned nothing in the way he expected. No lesson had been preached, no words had hammered at him. He had simply been allowed to exist fully in his own conflict, and it had shifted him. Bruce Lee finally stepped lightly to the side, as if signaling the room that the moment had ended. Yet there was no applause, no announcement. The release was silent, internal, shared among those present without spectacle. It was the kind of change that could be felt, but not catalogued, understood, but not spoken of easily. For a moment, the student simply breathed. The room seemed to breathe with him. The tension of public scrutiny dissolved into something more human, more fragile, yet more enduring. It was not a victory in the traditional sense. It was not a defeat either. It was a quiet recalibration, a subtle alignment between intention, expression, and reception. No one moved to fill the silence. It hung gently, respectfully, as if it knew its own importance. The student's eyes met Bruce Lee's one final time, and in that look was an unspoken acknowledgement. The confrontation was over, yet the understanding it had created would linger, far beyond the walls of the room. The moment ended not with applause, but with calm. And in that calm, the room, the student, and Bruce Lee were forever changed. The days that followed felt lighter, though no one could say exactly why. The room where the confrontation had occurred returned to its ordinary rhythm. Chairs scraped, footsteps echoed, conversations resumed, but something invisible lingered. People carried it with them in small ways. A softer tone, a longer pause before judgment, a subtle patience in their movements. The memory of the moment had not been loud, yet it left an imprint. The student walked differently now. He moved without the tightness of expectation pressing him down. Each interaction he had afterward was quieter, less defensive, less urgent. He discovered that speaking honestly did not require aggression, that being seen could arrive without demanding it. His anger had been transformed into awareness, his frustration into steady focus. It was not a miraculous change. There were still doubts and challenges, but the weight he had carried for weeks, months even, had diminished. Bruce Lee's influence was subtle yet enduring. He did not announce lessons or offer speeches. He did not frame the encounter as a turning point. Instead, the impact lay in the way he held presence, the steady calm that could hold another person's intensity without diminishing it. Others who had witnessed the moment began to notice changes in themselves too. They found space to listen more, to wait, to let moments unfold before responding. The ripple extended quietly, through gestures, through tone, through the example of restraint. The student began to reflect on what had truly mattered. It was not winning an argument, nor receiving immediate approval. It was the recognition that emotions could be held without shame, that challenges could exist without collapse, and that presence, true, steady presence, could shift entire dynamics without a single harsh word. Every time he thought back to Bruce Lee's sentence, he realized it was less about the words themselves and more about what they created. Space for honesty, space for calm, space for human connection. Weeks later, the student noticed himself responding differently in other situations. Tension did not escalate as quickly. The lesson of that day, though unspoken, had become a lens through which he could see himself and others more clearly. Even beyond the student, the ripple persisted in those who had witnessed it. They shared moments with friends or colleagues. Small acts of patience, quiet acknowledgement, and listening. None of it was dramatic, but all of it carried the imprint of that calm sentence, the power of restraint, and the quiet authority of presence. In the end, the confrontation that had seemed so sharp, so urgent, so potentially destructive, revealed a truth larger than any immediate conflict, that transformation does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it arrives in